Decision number 4, explicitness and focus on form. When to focus on form, you need to consider the context of instruction, the particular learning problems, and the nature of the linguistic form itself. As mentioned earlier, there are two types of language use. There is a highly skilled and effortless one, and then there is a halting and deliberate one. When there is too much focus on forms, it may result in deliberate rather than automatic language use. The best is to both focus on form and focus on meaning. Implicit is what is implied or understood through not directly expressed. It may be contained in the nature of something, although not readily apparent. Explicit is fully and clearly expressed, defined, or formulated. It is readily observable. Anne Ellis says that implicit learning is a non-conscious and automatic abstraction of the structural nature of the material arrived at from experience of instances, while explicit learning is conscious searching, building, then testing of a hypothesis, assimilating a rule following explicit instruction. Implicit focus on form tries to attract learner attention and to avoid metalinguistic discussion, always keeping main focus on the communication of meaning. On the other hand, explicit teaching tries to direct learner attention and to exploit pedagogical grammar in this regard. It is preferable to use focus on form explicitly on simple rules than implicit learning. Anne Ellis suggests that maybe the best for complex rules is explicit instruction with specially relevant examples. Carroll and Swain argue that explicit instruction combined with metalinguistic feedback may be helpful for rules that are not clear-cut. To help the learner to notice a form implicitly, frequency and input is needed. One way of attracting learners' attention to form implicitly is highlighting, color coding, or font manipulation. It is still implicit since the form has still not been explained. J. White suggests that it is better with attracting learners' attention followed with an explanation. Sharwood Smith claims that although the learner notices it perceptually, it is not clear if the student has noticed it linguistically. Jordanet performed an experiment on Spanish students, teaching preterite and imperfect. The conclusion was that it is very effective when the forms were highlighted and followed by an explanation. Still, it is important for the teacher to be aware, so there is no overload in focus, then it will be inutile. If things are too implicit, it will be difficult for the learner to notice it. It is important to lead the learner to notice any mismatch between interlanguage and target language. Lightbrown says that the learner needs to see that what they are saying is not what is meant to say. The output will make learners notice the gap between what they say and what they want to say. By making the students produce output, it is easier for the students to notice the gap between what they are saying and what they want to say. The output will show what they have learned and reflected upon. Swain says that there are two things that will help promote interlanguage restructuring. One is production of output and feedback, while the other is production of output combined with meta-talk. Swain further claims that doing dictogloss in pairs with meta-talk is necessary to go beyond communicative effectiveness to a fully accurate second language. Moranoy talks about interaction enhancement. Interaction enhancement can be divided into 3 stages. The first is the rehearsal stage. A problem is given, and the students have to solve it through interaction in pairs. The next stage is the performance stage. One student performs with the teacher observed by the class. The teacher will lead the student to a particular form while preserving the conversation. Further on, the teacher tries to give feedback which is manipulated so that the student will notice the gap between interlanguage and target language and to modify the incorrect output. The last stage is debriefing. The whole class evaluates the performance with focus on meaning. It is also possible to focus on forms. Decision number 5, sequential versus integrated focus on form. When focusing on form, it is important to stick to classroom tasks that are communicative and not to language as an object. Lodge and Blave-Roman say that for success, it is necessary to combine focus on form with focus on meaning. Murcia and Larson-Freeman go further in saying that focus on form must include forms, meaning, and function. Forms that are not easily noticeable and not communicatively necessary are often inaccurate in the interlanguage and could need to be focused on by the teacher. De Keyser and Lightbrown suggest that the best is to go from focus on forms to focus on form. This can be done by starting out giving a brief teach of the forms explicitly, then go on to controlled practice of the forms, and finally passing on to the focus on form by giving the students frequent opportunities in communication and activities to focus on form. Although many researchers agree with De Keyser and Lightbrown on this, the biggest obstacle is there is not enough time in the classroom. Because of the limited time, Skehan says that it is very important to notice errors in the interlanguage so that it is possible to change them before they become a stumbling block in the future. Getting rid of stumbling blocks takes a lot of time and effort. Lehman also talks about the attentional capacity of humans. It might be difficult to have focus on meaning and form if one of them is very complex. If this is the issue, it is important for the teacher to help the student to notice the form. But before focusing on the form, it is more important that the student understands the meaning first. There is no use focusing on the form if the meaning is not understood. A goal is to make the students intake the input. Input needs to be repeated and worked on to become long-term memory. Curran and Keel say that when the attentional capacity is reached, learning is no longer possible. Since some learning do not need the same amount of attention, like vocabulary, it is wise to lead students over to focusing on the lexical form when the meaning is complex. Van Patten say that the extent to which learners can process form and meaning together may be determined by the amount of knowledge that they have already acquired. Decision number 6, the role of focus on form in the curriculum. The teacher is the one that should put together the curriculum. Selecting tasks, it is important that the teacher is aware of the learners and what forms that is needed to focus on. If learners have started attempting the form in output or showing comprehension in input, it is necessary to focus on it. If there is no attempt, then start making the students noticing it. When students have started using the form, it is important that they notice the gap, and further instruction should be delayed until the students have adopted some of the form. To make this happen, it is important with feedback from the teacher. Focus on input, since the input forms the building blocks of the developing interlanguage system. In addition, it is better to have focus on one form at the time. Concluding with my perception on choices of form. Reading the article Pedagogical Choices and Focus on Form by Doughty and Williams have given me ideas of how I can change my teaching of languages in the classroom. I do agree that there is no need in using a lot of time on things that the students will notice and eventually correct by themselves. As a teacher, It is sufficient to give a short feedback when the error arises. Some complex grammar is wise to postpone and teach later than others. For instance, I also teach Spanish, and there is no sense in teaching preterite and imperfect until the tenses present, future, and perfect is in place. Because it is so different from the first language, it is very complex for the learners to acquire. In this way, I agree that one thing is to teach some steps ahead of where the learner is, but to jump stages is not wisely. The color coding and highlighting system for focus on form implicitly I find very interesting, and I think it is a good way of focusing on form, but I believe that I would use it explicitly, especially on complex forms, to help students noticing the forms in the input, but I would like them to discuss it to awaken their awareness. Most of all, I do believe in the formula, instruction to awaken students' awareness, and then abundance in input, and tasks which make the students communicate using the forms. Thank you.